Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel Center for Studies in Jewish Education at Brandeis University. I'm John Levison, I'm director of the Mandel Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this ongoing series of conversations with scholars of Jewish education. We created the series as a way to share scholarship in the field of Jewish education with a broad audience of educators and Jewish leaders. At the Mandel Center, we are committed to developing and promoting scholarship in Jewish education, especially scholarship on teaching and learning in Jewish education, in order to make a deep and lasting difference on the lives of learners and the vibrancy of the Jewish community. That's our mission. Today's session and our other events help us to serve our mission by getting ideas out into the world. We encourage you to take a look at the Mandel Center events page to see the rest of our upcoming events. We're delighted to have so many of you joining us live, and we hope to be able to take some of your questions as we go. So feel free to post those questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We're also recording today's session, and we'll make the recording available afterwards on our website for those who couldn't join us live. But the recording will only capture the presenter and me, and not the audience. Our guest today is my friend and colleague, Meredith Katz. Meredith teaches at the William Davidson Graduate School of Jewish Education at JTS. She's an alumna of Stanford University, and her doctorate is from Teachers College at Columbia. She's published on Israel education and the teaching and learning of Jewish history. But today, we're going to be talking about a study that she just recently published in the Journal of Jewish Education on the study of the Holocaust. Meredith, welcome. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here, and thank you for having me and for everyone who's joining.
Absolutely. We're talking today, as I just said, we're talking today about your recently published article. The title is, "Can I Alter the Statement? Considering Holocaust Education as a Catalyst for Civic Education in Jewish Day Schools." And this piece came out in the summer in the Journal of Jewish Education. Congratulations, it was great to see it. And I'm sure we're going to spend some time talking about what you mean by civic education. But before we get to that, let's start with some background. So how did you decide that you wanted to study this topic? Study how these Jewish kids responded to Holocaust education. And then how did that happen? What did you do actually?
And how did it happen? So there's the long version and the short version. I'll try to go with kind of the medium version, which is that my background is in history education, social studies education. I was a high school social studies and history teacher in both public and Jewish day school settings. And my doctorate is in social studies education. So I'm always looking for opportunities to learn more about how Jewish history is included, or as the case may be, not included so much in Jewish day schools in particular. And so, along those lines, one of the Jewish history topics that does get taught is Holocaust education. As you mentioned, I did work with Israel education. That's pretty much the other one. After that, it's a little more challenging to find consistency, but those two topics for sure are taught. And, at this point in time, and we have been here for a few, even decades now, we're at a place where Holocaust education and people who work in that area have to sort of reconsider how they're going to go about what they're doing, because we know we're getting further and further away from the event, and we're getting sadly further away from the people who were the witnesses to the event who can actually speak to us about it. So there's a big discussion in Holocaust education in the institutions, in the museums, in the professional development organization. What are we going to do when we don't have the survivors? How are we going to continue doing what we do? And I think that an important thing to do at that point is to say, okay, what are we going to do? But first, why are we even doing anything, right? What are our goals for Holocaust education in a variety of different settings? So I sort of wanted to take that approach and sort of take a step back and say, well, where are we now? And take a step back even more than that and say, well, rather than go to the institutions, go to the teachers, go and ask them, what are your goals for Holocaust education at this point? And are you thinking of modifying them or changing them? I wanted to hear first from students in day schools looking at that particular setting of Jewish education, because what we try to do from the administrative or teacher point of view hopefully is going to make its way to the students. We don't know that for sure, and we know that they come in with other pieces of education and background and experiences that shape what they think. But it's a good place to start to actually ask them, what do you think? Why do you think we study the
Right.
Holocaust in your Jewish day school? So that's the long picture of how I got to the study.
Yeah,
But the study.
in the case of Holocaust education, it's I don't know, unique. It's not unique, but it does seem particularly relevant because, as you said, the direct experience with survivors is diminishing, but kids get inputs on the Holocaust in lots of ways. Jewish kids and others, day school kids, certainly would be the case, whether it's from a synagogue setting or from family, family stories, any of those inputs. And you're saying, well, let's actually find out how these kids think, and that will help us to be more thoughtful in our design of curriculum or interventions. So then tell us more about the study itself.
So what actually happened? So I was very lucky that I have sort of access and relationship to a group of day schools through a program called the Jewish Court of All Time, which is a backstory to the story. So I'll try to tell it quickly. It's an online simulation program for middle school students in Jewish day schools. Every fall, they participate together on one website across school in a simulation. They participate anonymously in character, so they're not, seeing each other, but they are talking to each other, and all in writing. It's all asynchronous in writing. And so we have offered them a case study. There's a group of us, of college professors, who collaborate together. It's a fun project-y kind of thing. We create a case, we send it out to the schools, and we send them materials to work with, like sort of in class. It's really very much a blended learning opportunity. We absolutely are partnered with the teachers of the students who participate. They are teaching them the material in class. We send them primary sources to look at, a narrative, things like that. So it's very much in that sense, curriculum in the classroom, and then they go online. And one of our cases, it's not a JCAT, the Jewish Court of All Time, or shorthand JCAT, is not a Holocaust education program per se, but several of our cases do actually relate to the Holocaust and to anti-Semitism. And one was about the St. Louis ship, the ship that left Germany in May of 1939 and tried to bring 937 passengers. They thought they had safe passage to Cuba. They didn't, when they got here, they weren't let into Cuba. They were not let into the United States. They were not let into Canada. And so they went back. The ship was turned around and sent back to Europe, where many of the 937 passengers ended up back in countries that were later taken over by Hitler, and actually did perish in the Holocaust. So we used that Jewish historical story moment narrative to ask a current question. We're not asking anybody to reenact the Holocaust in any way, shape, or form. I'll just say that very clearly. But the question we asked a question about memorialization and how should the passengers on the St. Louis be memorialized. So in order for the students to debate that question, they had to understand the backstory, the story of the ship, and what happened. And so I knew that I had a group of schools that, not through my actions, I didn't go and teach them, but had worked on this topic for a series of weeks in the fall. So I knew they had exposure to some aspects of Holocaust education. And I thought that would be a good group to go and ask, why do you think we study the Holocaust in your Jewish day school? So I didn't ask them so much about the simulation. I didn't ask them what you like, what you didn't like. I was really just asking them, in general, in a bigger format, stuff about Holocaust.
Right. So it was a great opportunity. They were focused on this, and you had access. This wasn't an evaluation of the efficacy of the curriculum or what they learned from it. It was really just an opportunity to get their thinking. So that's really helpful. So let's turn to kind of the big picture about what you learned from this work at the 30,000-foot level. That's, as I like to say, what's the story here?
So I think I'll frame it in this way. I asked some questions using prompts that I had developed, and I had shown, first of all, it was 2 schools. It was, a bunch of different focus groups within the schools. So, and I had the opportunity to travel to those schools, and it was pre-COVID. I mean, I'm very, very much appreciative of that opportunity because it really helped me to have a much fuller understanding of the children, but also of the institutions, of the teachers, what's on the wall, the whole thing. So that's also part of the story. But in talking to them, I used a set of prompts, some of which I, see as very much particular reasons for studying the Holocaust in a Jewish school, because we want to remember our history, because we want to help other Jews, we want to look around and recognize anti-Semitism, we want to know what that is, things like that. And then I had a bunch of prompts that were sort of more universal. So, I did set them up with both things to look at and to consider. And the outcome that came out of it is that they were very supportive of the particular reasons for studying the Holocaust. And this is across two schools, right? There really wasn't any difference between how the students answered in schools by school. They said, it's our history. We have to remember our history. That's what Jews do. We remember things. And they actually did say, if we don't remember, who's going to remember? The survivors are getting older. Like, they actually said that without my even coming to it. And then I call it, it's my history, and then it's my history, but, right? It's our history, but. And they very quickly moved from the Jewish particular rationales to really much more supporting. We have to study the Holocaust. We have to know about it because it's our responsibility to help others fight against discrimination, to fight against human rights violations. They gave a lot of different examples of what they considered those to be, the kinds of things that you have to be an upstander for. And they used that language in one school in particular. That's a big part of the school mission, is to be an upstander. So that came through in what they said. But then they actually kind of put it together. It was, because we're Jews, we have to do this more than the other people. So the other kids, I asked them, should other kids in public school and private school learn about the Holocaust? And they said, yeah, they should learn about it, but we should learn about it more, and we have to do more about it. It's our responsibility. So they were putting the particular and the universal together. And, in a way, if you think about it, it's just kind of an extension of, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt and we got help. So now we should go help others. And I did hear them say, not that particular example, but that kind of thing. But on the other hand, I really saw them as beginning to take on an identity as a civic actor, and start to understand that they have a place in the outside world and that they could actually affect some change as a civic actor. And so I think that's the biggest picture.
Yeah, so it's helpful to think about this framing of particular and universal. You said you were giving them prompts, but you're also paying careful attention to how they're responding to those prompts, and they didn't see this as being in conflict. They see this as the expression of particularity is to be concerned for others who are discriminated against or suffering or something like that. So that's particularly interesting. And so can we drill down on what you mean by civic education? How do you think about civic education?
Sure, I think that's a really good question. In the background that I come from in social studies education, we kind of start with saying that, the project of schooling in general is a civic project. All schools, particularly all public schools, we see as civic institutions that we want to prepare good citizens who can go out in the world, in the country, and participate, who know their rights and their responsibilities and are responsible and all that kind of stuff. So if citizens, again, it's not only in schools, it's in all other places as well, but it is a responsibility of schools. So if you go from there, of course, once something becomes a school subject or becomes a school piece of curriculum, then there's going to be an argument about what's the best way to do it. How should we do it? What should the goals be? How should we carry it out? And one framework that I like to look at is, it's like well known in social studies circles by Joel Westheimer and Joseph Kahn, which is, they have an article called What Type of Citizen? And they catalog 3 types of citizens that through their research of different schools, they see schools having sort of aimed towards. And it's helpful to think about these 3 types, especially if then you want to think about, so what does that mean in a Jewish day school setting? So they talk about the personally responsible citizen who knows their rights and responsibilities and will take individual action. So you can prepare students to be that. They talk about the participatory citizen who knows about community and community organizations, government, bureaucracy, things like that, and can work within that system and actually be active and take even a leadership role. And then they talk about the justice-oriented citizen who understands that injustice, is aware of injustice, understands it exists, and tries to understand better why, even more understand why, and even thinks about working to take action against it. And I would say that the conversations that the students had, the comments that they made in this last bit about we should help the other people, that fits into that last justice-oriented citizenship, even though, right, Westheimer and Kahn say, you shouldn't just do one of them, right, that you need probably elements of all of them. I actually think you do need elements of all of those three types to have effective citizen or civic engagement. And they're not mutually exclusive either.
Right.
But, the justice-oriented one, I'm sure you can imagine in this day and time, is not so easy. It's not easy for public schools. It's not easy for Jewish schools, right? It's not, we want to feel like we have agency, but yet there's a lot going on that makes it very challenging.
Yeah. I want to just pause for a second. That there were a couple of clarifying questions. One of our guests asked about the name of the program, simulation program. So it's called the Jewish Court of All Time, or JCAT. That's sometimes the abbreviation. And then another question about the type of day schools, locations, and the grade, the age of the students.
Right. Oh, right. That's a great background piece. So as I said, they're all middle schools. They do actually, I don't remember in that particular year, but in general, they run the gamut from liberal, conservative, Orthodox. There's all different kinds. We actually have a few in Canada, and we even had one in Mexico for a few years. So that was very exciting. And we were very happy to have them. But these two classes, one was a combined 6th and 7th grade class, and one was 7th grade. And I think that's important because in Jewish day schools, like Holocaust education is from what I've heard and what the students told me, was 8th grade. So one of the classes in particular, one of the schools, they're like, we don't know anything. They won't tell us until next year. And except that they did this, they do JCAT every year. So it happened to be that they had this unit, but they said, we want to know, we really do want to know. And actually they really did know a lot. And that's, one of the differences between what I saw when I did research, behind the literature that's out there about Holocaust education. One of the concerns in Holocaust education in non-Jewish schools and public schools is that they sort of skip the actual history and get more quickly to the, takeaways of universal help everybody. But that is not the case, or was not the case in these two schools that I saw. They, academic historians could have issue with some of the ways they talked about some of the facts and the way they talked about some of the groups. But from my perspective, for 6th and 7th, 11 and 12-year-old, I thought they actually did a really good job 6 weeks after telling me the whole story and really understanding cause and effect and what a turning point is and things like that. So they got the facts.
So you, in the paper, you introduced the distinction between learning about and learning from. Right. And your argument is if we're gonna do this well, we need both. You can't be learning from and without actually spending some time actually understanding the thing you're trying to learn from. So that's helpful. I want to circle back to this to the issue about civic education. I mean, it's really striking to me that the kids seem to respond to or have a kind of a way of thinking that they've absorbed that this is something that they have maybe some responsibility as a result of the Holocaust, not only to study the Holocaust, not only because it's our story, that too, because you definitely heard that, and then also to do this other thing. You mentioned a couple of the theorists of civic education, but there was another one that you quoted, and I actually want to go back to that for a moment. You quote Walter Parker from 1996. Who says that the guiding question for civic education should be something like this. Here's the quote: "How can we live together justly in ways that are mutually satisfying and that leave our differences intact and our multiple identities recognized?" And what I find so interesting about that is it's a concept of civic education that pushes back on maybe some assumptions about, the way to be a citizen is to be sort of neutral about your commitments, right? To just be a citizen of, let's say, of the United States. And, what do the United States need? What do all the people in the United States need? And he's saying, well, actually, the deeper civic education question that should be guiding our thinking and maybe also our teaching is, how do we come together, as he says, with our identities recognized, with our differences intact? So I'm wondering, did you hear any of that kind of sensibility from the students?
Yeah, I'm so glad you raised that. Walter Parker is now an emeritus professor at the University of Washington and still writing and saying similar things. And I actually think it was almost like he wrote that quote about we need our individual identities intact, but yet we still have to learn how to engage in the outside world with each other. I feel like he wrote that for Jewish day schools, although of course he didn't. And that's actually, from another angle, that's a starting point for some of my work, which is to say that we know Jewish day schools are not homogenous. We know there's diversity within the school for sure, but they're more homogenous within themselves than, as I like to say, the public school across the street, should there happen to be a public school across the street. And I think, it is a really big challenge, and that to me is how I define civic education for Jewish day school, is how to have our students, leave that world and go out, still have their strong identity, and engage with others who also will have their strong identity and find a common meeting place. And I think, an important step now that we, if you take the Holocaust education as a very strong foundation, they understand, they think they have this responsibility. So what is the next action step, right? If there's a lot of programs and curricula that use the Holocaust to talk about what you should do, but actually we also need to have in schools opportunities for practicing and actually getting experience in being with others. And that's particularly challenging, in a Jewish day school. And that's something that takes a lot of hard work on both schools, both sides, right? I've seen countless stories or articles or research of, we brought the kids together and it didn't work. And that's because it is a very difficult, challenging thing, and a lot of preparatory work has to be done before. But I've also seen and heard about really exciting opportunities. For example, with the Facing History program, there's one like headquarters in Tennessee, which obviously is a very different context than where I am here in New York, and these schools were more on the western side of the country that I studied. But in Tennessee, where a Jewish school, an Orthodox Jewish school, does a very strong Facing History program and does meet downtown with students of color from public schools, and they do, and I have an ongoing relationship. So that's where I see civic education as being an important thing for Jewish.
Yeah. So what's helpful, when I think about this, I'd like to imagine that there's a form of Jewish civic education, which is preparing students to be, you said, both civic actors and Jewish actors. And these two things are not contradictory. It's not like, you do this some of the time and do this other parts of the time. No, what we actually want is people who are engaged, that's engaged with their community in lots of ways, smaller communities, bigger communities, who bring all of their commitments into the real world. Let me switch for a moment, because one of the interesting, there was another interesting aspect of the study that had to do with how the kids talk about anti-Semitism. Now, you gathered the data, am I correct? You gathered data before Charlottesville and before Pittsburgh.
I think maybe after Charlotte, I'm not sure.
Okay, so it was a few years back, and the ground is shifting. Like, I think we can say that for sure, that the ground is shifting. But what you heard from the kids when you were gathering the data is that the kinds of anti-Semitism that they identified don't really compare to genocide. So they wanted to, well, tell me if this is correct. They wanted to kind of hold those two a little bit separate. The Holocaust and genocide on the one hand, and anti-Semitism on the other. Am I getting that right?
I think so. I think it's safe to say that anti-Semitism wasn't really on their radar. They for sure didn't think anything like a genocide would happen again. And it's hard to hear that for some people, but they really push back on it. And in fact, the title "Can I Alter the Statement" comes from that, because I had some sentence about we should make sure Jews are safe around the world, and they say, "Can I alter the statement?" It should be everybody is safe around the world, not just Jews. And they really did have a sense that this was it's not so bad for us anymore. It used to be, but it's not so bad anymore. So, I really, for sure, they didn't dwell too much on anti-Semitism besides genocide, and they didn't think genocide was a possibility in the world in which they live. And I thought a little bit about why that was, and speaking, part of the research was speaking with the teachers and the administrators. And I think, part of it is really you have to consider the age. They are young. And they hadn't had formal Holocaust education yet, where they might have learned about historical anti-Semitism and then started to think about it in various forms in the world today, but they hadn't had that yet. And more generally, what I heard was, we don't want them to be scared, which is we don't want them to know about the possibility of anti-Semitism in their own community, which was possible. And the events that you mentioned didn't happen to them, but I'm sure when they did happen, today's the anniversary of Pittsburgh, right? Like, I'm sure they did talk about it, but it hadn't happened like that at that moment. When it comes up, we talk about it, but not too much, because we don't want them to be scared. And then that's a debate in Holocaust education in general. How early do you start? And then the Jewish part of that also is we want them to think that Judaism is joyful. We don't want them to be depressed. So, we want to spend our limited time not talking about that. So I think that was part of it. And I also think that, from talking to schools as part of another project that I've been working on about how Jewish day schools engage with issues of race and racism, we asked different schools specifically, do you talk about anti-Semitism in the context of racism? And we got mixed answers, but what we got more of was, we talk about anti-Semitism when something happens in school, or that happens in the football game, or happens and we have to address it, that it happened to them, not that it's, a framework. So I think it's a difficult challenge. I don't know. I mean, you want them to be realistic, and you want them to know. You don't want to dampen their enthusiasm for Judaism, or their enthusiasm to go out and talk to other people and meet other people if they're scared that something bad is going to happen to them because they're Jewish. So I think it's an important area for further consideration at this time, especially.
Yeah, and I would also just add that, like a lot of things, like the Holocaust, like Israel, the adults have a hard time talking about anti-Semitism, and that makes it that much harder for educators to talk about anti-Semitism and to have a sense of, well, what is it that we are actually trying to help our students understand in some kind of mature and sophisticated way. So we're about out of time. So let me just ask you a final question. What do you think the key takeaway is? What do you think Jewish educators can learn from this article about these? It's a particular group of kids at a particular moment, right? You're not making claims about all kids and all times, and we just talked about some things may have changed. But what do you think Jewish educators can learn from this research about their own setting?
I think just that, right? This was the setting that I explored, but I went through a particular process that anybody could go through in any particular school. All politics is local, really all education is local. It really depends on your school community and the stakeholders in your school. And so I encourage any school to listen to, especially the students, and what are they saying and what are they thinking. If you're in this process of trying to figure out how to strengthen both Holocaust education and civic education, but particularly the Holocaust education, see what's going on, see what the students especially, have gleaned over the years, most recently, and then look for the pieces that are out there of all the things you do, not just the curriculum, but also the program, but also this, and sort of see where those pieces come together and where the connections between all of them could be strengthened. And then, in terms of Holocaust education particularly, I really see, I understand that Holocaust education is a necessary, very important Jewish event, or how the Holocaust is a necessary, important Jewish event that must be taught particularly to Jews because it's about Jews and it affects Jews, and we have a unique relationship to that very cataclysmic event. And I think that we also are doing a solid job of building that foundation of understanding about the Holocaust and why it's important to Jews. And we have this opportunity to create, civic engagement, civic education opportunities for students to begin to see themselves as civic actors based on what they're already starting to feel based on their Holocaust education.
Great, great. Thank you, Meredith. It's great to talk with you about your work. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I encourage everyone to check out the Mandel Center events page to learn about other upcoming events and videos of our prior events. Our next session of the series will be November 17th. I'll be speaking with Professor Judah Cohen about his research on the music of Debbie Friedman and the impact that she had, that the music had on Jewish education. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Meredith. Take care.